Hello, and welcome to Technically Baltimore's The Look Ahead. Today, I'm with Seema Iyer, who's the Associate Director of the Jacob France Institute and the University of Baltimore's Merrick School of Business, and that makes her the head honcho of Baltimore's Neighborhood Indicators Alliance.
Very
So thank
exciting.
you for joining us, Seema. And also, I skipped the part where I tell you who I am. I'm Donte Kirby, reporter for Technically. And this series, we're exploring the theme of the new normal and discussing lessons we've learned from 2020. But back to my guest, Seema Iyer. Can we talk a bit about your background? Because you've had many roles outside of working with the Jacob France Institute. You've been I feel like the data aficionado in multiple administrations and have gone from, I want to say, the government side to the private sector. And now you're doing like a bit of a mix of both as the liaison between the two at the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. It sounds like a mouthful, but it actually like really encompasses what you guys do in the name.
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation to be here, and really excited about all the work that you and Technically Baltimore have been doing to keep us all informed during a pretty crazy year. So thank you for your work. So I came to Baltimore in 2005, and my background, I'm actually an urban planner. I became a data geek through the planning process, I guess. I have a quantitative background, but I'm an urban planner. And I came to Baltimore because Baltimore City was going through a comprehensive master planning process. And that's what my doctoral dissertation was all about, was under what conditions do cities turn to the planning process as a way to get out of chaotic situations? And I had done this work internationally. And, population loss, which we're going to talk about, and the decades of population loss is a chaotic experience for cities. Most cities don't think about declining. We think about growth. And so for us to be declining the way Baltimore and so many cities on the East Coast and the Rust Belt had been doing is an experience and a little bit of chaos. And so Baltimore was going through a comprehensive master planning process, and I had the great opportunity to kind of be a part of that back in 2005. And so I got here in 2005, which was the last year for Martin O'Malley when he was mayor. And then I made it through Sheila Dixon when she was mayor, and then a little bit of Stephanie Rawlings Blake when she became mayor. And then in 2011, had the opportunity to take over the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. And the whole time since 2005, I had been on, basically, we call the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance BNIA, if you're a local, so BNIA. I'd been on the steering committee for BNIA because of the role that I played at the Baltimore City Planning Department. I was the chief of research and kind of always admired or maybe envied how much data was sitting at the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. Because if we think about 2005 in the city of Baltimore, data consolidation, data integration, data interoperability was still a pretty new idea. This is before open data, before the concept even of open data, really. And BNIA kind of was at the forefront of providing information to neighborhoods. It was really a link between what is going on inside your city and what's going on inside your neighborhood. So had the great opportunity to take over the BNIA project in 2011. And I will say maybe it had been around in Baltimore for about 10 years. But a lot of people didn't really know the value of the data, I don't think, in 2011. Some people did, but not everybody. And you really have to penetrate where everybody knows about it. It can't just be that one sector of the economy knows about neighborhood data, because neighborhoods matter to everybody. Neighborhoods matter because we live there. Neighborhoods matter because we work there. Neighborhoods matter because we drive through there. Neighborhoods matter because they are our city. All neighborhoods comprise our city. And so since I took over in 2011, I guess my major focus has been, how do we make sure that these data are something that people look at least? They might not use it, they might not like it, they might not understand it, but they've got to at least know that it's there, so that whatever they're doing, whether they're starting a business or whether they're moving in, they have some information about that neighborhood, and they're not just starting from scratch, right? You can know about a place before you even get there by looking at their data. You have to do more to really know about a place by talking to people, by walking around, by getting to know the place and seeing what their plans are for the future. But if a good start is to at least look at their neighborhood data and see, where have they been, what are they doing, what are they experiencing? Because each neighborhood is a little bit unique if you look at their data.
Can you talk a bit about like what Baltimore Neighborhood Indicator Alliance is as an organization and like why it's important to a city? Because I come from Philadelphia, and I don't think it has like a organization specifically to let the community know its data. I don't think Philly has like open data portal at this point, but it's possible it does. I could just not know about it. But I guess that's kind of speaks to the point of like these things being available and like people may or may not know about it.
Well, I'm from Philly too, so go Phillies, I guess. I don't know. And we are part of what's called the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, and Philadelphia did not have a partner city in this partnership. So we are part of that network. We were the 6th city to get into this nationwide network of cities. There are 30 around the country right now. And the basis when we started back in 1999, 2000, so we've been around for more than 2 decades, the basis was that if you want to do anything preventative in a neighborhood, like stop the decline from happening, you can't wait for the decennial census to come out. You need information in a much more timely manner. And so that's the basis of kind of why this organization was created. And census data is actually only one piece of the puzzle of all the data that can represent a neighborhood. The city is constantly collecting data. It's constantly collecting data because we interact with our city on a daily basis. And so how can we harness all of this kind of new electronic data that was coming out of the city starting in the 1990s, electronically submitting bills? That's a data set. Calling 311, which was the city of Baltimore was the first city in the nation to have a 311 system. That's a data set, right? That's actually like a little sensor coming out of every neighborhood of what people care about, like fix my pothole or there's trash in the alley. That's bits of information that people are actually conveying electronically that we can start to integrate and interoperationalize by looking at the data. So the goal is to basically have constant sensors, and that's what you think about the data to be, constant sensors in our neighborhoods so that we can all better understand not necessarily the actual neighborhood, but maybe kind of what you might think of the physiology of the neighborhood. The actual neighborhood are the people that live there and the businesses that operate there. You have to get to know them. But the physiology of the neighborhood tells us something too, and you kind of need to know both. So the goal is that it doesn't matter actually if I give you data today. It matters that I give you data today and tomorrow and the day after and the year after, so that you can literally look at trends, because it's about what directionality a neighborhood might be going in. So we produce over 100 different indicators for every neighborhood in the city of Baltimore. And that is the point. Every neighborhood has what's basically a little bit of a battery of indicators. And those 100 indicators, again, is not who the neighborhood is, but it's a reflection of the direction that neighborhood might be going in. So how many houses sold last year? Is that more or less than the neighboring community? How much did it sell for? How long did it take to sell? How many kids are in the school system? How many kids are there overall? You might have a lot of kids, but they don't all go to the public school system. And that's something to think about. And then we have fun indicators, like how many people in your neighborhood have a library card, which is something that's actionable for neighborhoods to kind of deal with. How many people call 311? How many people call 911? What are the crime incidents in your neighborhood? And all of these seem like relatively simple ideas, but they're actually hard to calculate for neighborhoods on a routine basis, because technology changes, the way the city collects data changes, and we have to make a decision on how to make something seem the same as 2005 and same in 2015. We have tons of housing data. Where do we have vacancy? Where do we have citations? And all of this also requires us to get to know our own city government, right? The city, when I say the city collects data, it's somebody sitting in some agency responsible for this role. And it's a lot of work for them too, to even collect this kind of data. So we have a pretty good understanding of how our city even functions from a public administrative point of view. And the data tells us a lot about that. And then the fun thing is that neighborhoods will tell us about a data set that we should collect because they have interacted with their data, with their government for some reason. And they say, well, now that must be a data set. You should collect that and show us kind of what's going on. So looking at city data, looking at state data, looking at federal data, and in some cases we purchase data for neighborhoods and put it out. And then the key, like I said, is that everybody, no matter who you are, has to look at the same information so that we're even operating with some common understanding of what's going on in our neighborhoods.
And to go a bit more on that directionality tangent, like the population data for the 2020 census has come out. And shout out to Benya, because I wouldn't even know this information if you guys hadn't done the report and talked about how like Baltimore is at its lowest population in a century, like a little under 586,000 people.
Yep.
But this, as Benya notes, this neighborhood loss isn't felt the same in every neighborhood. The Black Butterfly is losing 10% or more of its population, where the White L is gaining like 2%.
Or more, yeah.
Or more. Yeah. And it's another example of the stark divide in communities in a city. So what does data trends like this mean for the city of Baltimore?
Yeah, so over the last decade, the question is, how do we not pit neighborhoods against each other, but really help show that they have a common goal? And one of them is that no neighborhood wants to decline in population, whoever you are, whether you're in the Black Butterfly or in the White L, no neighborhood wants to be declining in population. What they want is a way to continuously attract people into a neighborhood, because people will naturally always leave a neighborhood. Somebody will move, somebody might pass away. And so what's the way to kind of at least replace them? And so every neighborhood has to have a reason for people to even want to come and live there. And every neighborhood does have that reason. And neighborhoods need a way to kind of communicate that reason, attract people in, and have a way to do that up front, right? So that you're the person welcoming newcomers, and it's not the other way around. It's not, that you're getting newcomers and you don't know to expect them. You should expect them, and you should welcome them and let them know that they're coming into your neighborhood, not the other way around. They might come as any newcomer would and change the flavor of a neighborhood, but at least you do that together and not kind of, butting heads to each other. So really thinking about and even if we think about the Black Butterfly, as Dr. Brown calls it, there's a lot of heterogeneity even within that. There's a lot of variation between the Black experience, even by neighborhood, whether you live in East Baltimore and whether you live in West Baltimore, even though they're both 93% African-American neighborhoods, it is a different experience. We have some neighborhoods where there's very high home ownership, even though it has 93% African-American. And then we have some neighborhoods where there's 35% vacant and abandoned housing, also 93% African-American. Two completely different experiences of a neighborhood. And so what we wanted to try and do is get to some type of a universal message. That the first thing anybody should do is ask the question, are people moving into your neighborhood or out of your neighborhood? And that is a universal message. That's for any neighborhood, regardless of what the racial makeup is or where you're located. And if, you're growing, you're actually bucking the trend, right? The city as a whole is actually declining. And so if you're growing, you're experiencing something that is very different than other people in the same neighborhood. And growth, on the one hand, we all want, at least stability or growth, but growth begets other issues, right? When you have population growth, you actually attract retailers, right? People want to sell to people where there's growth. And where there's retail, you will get property crime because now there's something to steal. So if we look at things like in South Baltimore and Locust Point, where does the crime occur? It occurs on Ford Avenue because there's a lot of businesses there. There's a lot of people coming in and out of the bars that are down there. There's cars parked on the street there. And so when we see incidents of crime, they happen where retail happens. And so even though the neighborhood's growing, you think, oh, what kind of problems could you possibly have because you're growing? There are issues that you need to address. And then if you're a long-term resident, even in a place like South Baltimore, you might feel like you're going to get displaced because people are going to buy you out, or the new retail that's coming isn't meant for you, quote unquote. So growth has its own issues, but then obviously decline has its issues too. So decline, the number one indicator of a declining neighborhood, is vacant and abandoned property. People leave or people pass away and they don't take their structure with them, right? The structure is still there. And that becomes a burden to everybody else that's left, right? Imagine taking care of your house and then also having to take care of the two houses around you. That's more burden than any one of us would want. And that's the situation on the ground in places where you have a declining population. And so once you know this one thing, are people moving in or are people moving out, or people not coming in, you'd actually know a bunch of other issues about that same neighborhood. You have the problems associated with growth or the problems associated with decline. And they're not exactly the same problems. And so this becomes a way sometimes that neighboring neighborhoods can't even talk to each other because they actually have different issues and they're still in the same city. So we need to find ways to build coalitions across neighborhoods with neighborhoods that have the same issues or similar issues. They might not actually be physically next to each other, but they might be far apart, but they still need to kind of band together and address the needs of their neighborhoods collectively. And I've seen that the data helps us do that. Neighborhoods that are similar along a particular indicator actually have something in common. And how can we kind of build coalitions with those kinds of neighborhoods, educate our elected officials that they might want to actually band together across different districts to address the needs that are actually not physically similar, but functionally similar. And that's hopefully what our next step is, to really, think about, even if we think about what we might call those neighborhoods that have declined, that are predominate in the Black butterfly, they have something in common, but they have no way to gather, right, and actually talk about what their common issues might be. They're in different political districts, they're in different state districts, they're in different federal districts. So who's going to convene them to think through solutions? And that's hopefully what we want to do as the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, bring neighborhoods together that have commonality with the indicators and find some common ground to move the city in a different direction.
Yeah, I guess that leads into the next question of what people should do with this data, or even in that scenario, because there's a way that maybe somebody in the government might handle the data and somebody who's outside the government might handle the data. But for those who's just a resident and they see the data, I guess, why is it important for them to even see this kind of data, and why, what can they or should they do with this information?
Yeah, so there are multiple people and multiple what you might call domains that are involved in governance, right? In governing our city. The mayor is actually only one aspect of governing our city. We all play some role in that. And so the number one thing, the lowest common denominator, is look at the data for your neighborhood or where you might live or where you might work. And if you have any questions, please contact us, because we're happy to provide lots of training on how to look at the data. We actually have training modules on our website of what to do with data just to look at it. So that's at the fundamental level, is become aware, right? And then if you are in your own neighborhood, take a look at the community profile for your neighborhood. The community profile lists the 100 indicators over the last 10 years. We have up to the 20 years, but on our website, we just have the 10 years because that's probably too much information right there. And look at those trends. What are the trends in terms of affordable housing? Do you have any affordable housing in your neighborhood? Do you have any kind of houses being on sale? Are people, what is the crime rate? Actually know about these things. So, and then formulate a plan in your neighborhood using that data to figure out how that particular neighborhood is going to go out, or move forward and progress and improve quality of life. But like I mentioned, no neighborhood is going to solve this by their own. We need to kind of form coalitions, band together, and think through not only how neighborhoods can work together to address some of the distinct issues that they might have, but we do have some policy things to think through. it is not just because we're Baltimore that we're declining. There are some things that we're just missing, right? We're on the East Coast, we're in the megalopolis region between Washington and Boston. And we're the only city that continues to lose population. So our hometown of Philadelphia gained 5.1% of its population. And that's the first time it's done that in 7 decades. And if you look at Baltimore and Philly, we have so many similarities. So how could we lose 5.7% and then gain 5.1%? There's something that we can learn from Philly in particular. The one that we've noticed in terms of the data is that if you look at the areas that have declined in population, they do not currently have any access to either a transit line or a highway line. And more importantly, unfortunately, a highway line, because our transit system is not really a system. It's just a couple of lines. Right now, if you want to come in and out of the city of Baltimore, the vast majority of us do it through the highway system. And so if you look at which neighborhoods grew, they happen to be predominantly white, but they also, probably more importantly, they happen to have access to either I-83, I-95, 695 in the city. So you can get out of those neighborhoods pretty quickly and into the region. We have some neighborhoods like, Harlem Park, which is a decent neighborhood, but it's on the way to nowhere. No one's passing by Harlem Park unless they're actually passing by Harlem Park. And it's literally along that highway called the Highway to Nowhere, which was demolished many years ago along Route 40 on the west side of Baltimore. So really thinking about policy changes that we need, and that is what we are working on with our elected officials. But again, not just elected officials, we need neighborhood leaders to know what potential policy recommendations might be, so that they help advocate for them too, or that advocates actually help advocate for these things. And the media kind of knows how to inform people about these issues. So all of us are involved in making decisions for all of our neighborhoods because we all care, because it's all of our city.
And sort of switch gears to like the general year and issues that we've all been facing. I guess what has 2020 and this beginning half of 2021 taught you?
Well, 2020 was a difficult year for a variety of different reasons, but obviously the first of all, trying to work offsite, get prepared, because we have a lot of data and a lot of secure data, and how to do that securely with technology. That was my main goal, was to make sure that we didn't have any breach of data, make sure that we had data security. And for anybody that deals with data security, like how mind-boggling that could be to remotely kind of tap into all this data in a secure manner. So that was my first thing, because that would be unique for us to be working, all of us working remotely. And then the next one, for better or worse, there were so many things that people didn't know, because nobody knows anything about COVID-19 back in March of 2020. And so the good or bad news is that data science, which is what we do, was a hot commodity in 2020. We got asked by so many people to do so much data analysis, which is great for us, but really a huge, there's a lot of work for my staff. So my staff needed a little bit of a break after the year was over. So we were tracking who's calling 311 and what kinds of things are changing in terms of 311, because it was totally new. And that was the only data that we had. Who's calling 311 for COVID-19? Who's calling the 211 system for COVID-19? So we stood up a lot of different visualizations and data tracking on a weekly basis, because that's how fast people needed it. And that's unusual for us. We normally do things on like a quarterly or yearly basis. So trying to put out data to help people understand the current situation was what we're good at, and hopefully what we were able to contribute to. If we couldn't do, like, we weren't literally in the ER saving people's lives, but we were trying to get data out for that, so that you could try and do that. But then, after the death of George Floyd, it became very reminiscent of what we all experienced here in the city after the death of Freddie Gray, which was personally devastating, because you think, what's the point of putting out all this data if we're not actually solving anything, right? If we're not actually fixing a problem or helping people, change lives. And so that became a challenge for us to think through. We are doing this work to increase equity and justice in our city. We might not call it that, or it wasn't called that 20 years ago, but that's really what we're after. We are interested in making sure that Black lives matter and that Black neighborhoods matter, as Dr. Brown calls it. That is what we're after. We don't want to live in a city where we're segregated and where some neighborhoods have everything and some neighborhoods have nothing. That's not a just and equitable city. So we had to be very clear that we do have a stake in the ground, that we have a perspective, that we are not just putting out the data to see where the chips may fall. We're in it. We're holding ourselves accountable to increase quality of life in every one of our neighborhoods. We want to have neighborhoods not be separate but equal, because we can see that they're not. 20 years of data where you see so much disparity year after year after year. We want it to be where neighborhoods are truly equal, where we have equal opportunity for everybody, no matter what neighborhood you're in. And that's the goal for us. But sometimes as a researcher, as an academic institution, putting that kind of a gauntlet down is actually not something that we're supposed to do, or we don't think we should. In journalism, you're supposed to stay neutral. No, academics are even more subject to that. But having a stance and putting out a point of view doesn't necessarily mean you're not objective. Neutrality is not necessary to be objective. You can be objective and still have a point of view. And in some ways, I should put out a point of view because I'm sitting on top of all this data. I have a stethoscope on neighborhoods for the last 10 years, so I can hear the beat through the data. And if I just sit on what I'm seeing, that's actually complacency, which I don't want to do. So in this last year, we've had to put that message out very clearly that we do have a point of view. We're here for a purpose. We want to hold ourselves accountable as well as the rest of us accountable and make sure that the city moves forward and all of our neighborhoods truly have equal opportunity for everybody.
And
that's what we're after.
Again, as that person with the stethoscope, and it might be a little much to ask you to read the tea leaves. I guess what's the trends that you've been seeing as you've been working with the data and seeing the data over a decade? And I guess what trends have you seen and what do they indicate for the future of the city?
Yeah, again, as a researcher, I wasn't a believer that the data could tell me things, that normally you're supposed to come at things with some type of hypothesis or some type of a priori understanding of what's going on. But after 10 years, I'll tell you, the data tells me every time. The data tells me to look in places that I would have never looked before. The access to mobility and accessibility within our neighborhoods is our fundamental problem. It is just hard to get into and out of our neighborhoods right now. And without that, you're not going to get people looking at a neighborhood. And if you don't get people looking at a neighborhood, they don't even think that they could move there or that they could even go to the pizza shop in the neighborhood or something like that. So eyes into our neighborhoods that transit could provide, that better transportation could provide, that better bike lanes or scooter lanes or however we want to do it, or free Lyft and Uber. We need to get people into some of our neighborhoods just to even see them if we have any chance for them to grow into the future. So that's one thing, really thinking about how do we flow? And that's the physical way we flow. But we've got to deal with digital connectivity, social connectivity, capital connectivity. It's over and over and over again. So some of our neighborhoods are isolated across all these different ways of connection. So really addressing issues of connection to our neighborhoods, whether it's through the transit system, whether it's through broadband, whether it's through capital resources, and whether it's through more socialization, like actually getting people into and out of our neighborhoods for cultural opportunities. That's more what we need. And that's one broad kind of concept. And then the second concept is, how do we integrate? How do we actually break down some of the social divides that we have and have people get to know each other, feel like this is their city, regardless of who you are, feel like you can actually go into any neighborhood imagine a city, and if we think about the great cities of the world, this is true, that anyone from any neighborhood of any kind of race, gender, ethnicity, whatever, should be able to freely live, work, or play in any neighborhood. And that's the kind of neighborhood, that's the kind of city that we all want. So that you don't look odd none of us should look odd going into any neighborhood. That shouldn't be the way a city functions. City should be welcoming to everybody. And so that's the integration of how do we actually learn to live together, work together, and probably more so live together than work together. How do we learn to live together? How do we learn to experience the same spaces together so that it becomes normal, right? And not that some people stay over here and some people stay over here. We got to get out of that mentality. So integration and connectivity and how the data is really getting us there. That's what I think we need to move forward. And we need something now. It's not 10 years from now. We didn't get the red line back in 2015. And then we didn't get anything else in its place. So it's not just that we didn't get the red line, it's that we didn't get anything else either. So we have to think with urgency. We have to think bold. We should put down some gauntlets. Like, what if we're the first city in America that has free bus system for anybody that comes to the city? I don't know, maybe that's an idea. What if we have free Wi-Fi in every single one of our main streets? You know, you come there, you shop at the main street and you have Wi-Fi, you can sit outside and like do your work and have coffee and do whatever else is being offered on our main streets. We need to have something really bold that gets people into and out of our neighborhoods now. And hopefully we'll get there.
I guess on that note, and the obligatory is like, is there anything we haven't talked about? Anything you feel people should know about Dinya or just about, you know, using data science to advocate for their communities?
Yeah. So obviously we put out literally one map or two maps back last Thursday when the data first came out. And so now we're digesting that. We have not only the new 2020 census data that's coming out, but we have more than 10 years worth of vital signs data that we have to really digest and process. So coming up in the next couple of months, we want to kind of look at how neighborhoods have changed over the last 10 years. And we want to do that together. We'll be issuing a series of very digestible briefs for anybody to look at and better understand, how did we change socioeconomically? How did we change in terms of housing vacancy? How did we change in terms of mobility? How do we change in terms of broader quality of life issues? And then we want to bring people together to try and get to solutions. The solutions that I recommended are things that I see in the data, but we have to come collaboratively and collectively to come up with an agenda moving forward. So we have a series of neighborhood change and neighborhood conversations that we're going to be spearheading in the next couple of months. So stay tuned.
And thank you again, Seema, for taking the time to talk to me. It's always informative, and I learned so much about Baltimore and I guess what it means to, you know, have a city and like how these things grow and change. But again, thank you again. And that's been
Thank you for all your work.
And that's been Technically Baltimore's Look Ahead. And until next time, stay connected.